I've already messed up because I was on mute. Welcome to this event convened by the Runnymede Trust. My name is Halima Begum and I'm representing Runnymede Trust for the evening. I'm going to be chairing this event, but mainly it's to really create a platform for fantastic panelists who you'll hear from, and for you watching out there in the public space. Today is a significant day for us. Really significant day where we're all reflecting on the murder of George Floyd a year on, 1 year on. It's a space that we're not only going to hold, but we're going to own a bit of this space to talk through the reflections of how we're all feeling, connect to the public at large who want to understand how we're all collectively feeling about race and racism in the UK, and also remember George Floyd. We've got into this space now because there's been a lot of demand for a bold space for anti-racism and discussing our concerns together. So really we're here to open this space for you, and thank you so much for joining us. Today is about your voice and our panelists. I'm going to go straight into introducing our fantastic panelists with us today. In no particular order, I'm introducing Pauline Miller. Pauline, if you could wave. Yeah, there you go. Pauline currently serves as the head of culture at Lloyd's of London, with a focus on ensuring that ethnic minority employees are able to succeed in areas of business at all levels of business. Pauline has lots of other important roles in her extracurricular life as well, including being a member of the Girls Up United Nations Foundation, and also other positions in business and life and so on. So welcome, Pauline, to this discussion. And you'll be talking a lot about the business side of things and the corporate side. Next in line is Sace Holmes-Lewis. Sace, you are the founder of Mentivity, CEO of Mentivity, an inspiring mentoring initiative that seeks to inspire young people, men and women, to succeed in life, particularly minority young people who haven't had the best start in life. We look forward to hearing your voice and insights. We've also got Wilf Sullivan. Wilf, you worked for the Trade Union Congress for many, many years. A lot of people know who the TUC is. So it'd be great to hear your perspective on how we protect workers' rights in public services and what more we can learn from there. And Una Alexis, you represent a fantastic organization in the north of the country, co-founder of the Pursuit of Happiness. What a wonderful name. Pursuit of Happiness, a community interest company based in Kirklees, West Yorkshire, that seeks to make Yorkshire and the wider UK a place in which Black people can thrive. Highly committed to bringing about change for the benefits of the whole of the Black community, and we look forward to hearing your voice and your experiences. And we've got Honesty Tamara from the Runnymede Trust, who is representing us and our perspective. And I'm just so pleased to have Honesty represent us. Honesty joined us probably about 5 months ago, and her voice, her inner voice, is inspirational, and you'll see why. So today, as I said, was a significant day, is a significant day. It's been a sober day for us all. We've kind of moved into work, we've gone about our day jobs, but all of us is actually holding quite a lot of emotion and a lot of feeling. And we just wanted to open this space out and encourage you to reflect on what progress has been made on understanding and dismantling racism in this country. What more can we do? How are we feeling? Got no agenda other than to hear from you. So I'll start with the first question, maybe with Pauline. How are you feeling today, Pauline? And what's on your mind right now in relation to a year on after George Floyd's murder?
Yeah. So good evening, everyone. I have to say it's been a really reflective, not just today, but in the run up to today, as I've started to think about where was I a year ago, what was I doing a year ago, and you know, I often reflect and think about how many of the deaths that we'd seen previously that I was so much more aware of, and wasn't there on the day that George Floyd was killed. And it's because I had been shut in an office and hadn't seen it and had shut out all social media. And a year on, I came back into the business a week later with huge amounts of work, and there's been lots of work on. But a year on, I started to reflect again on that sense of the silent voice and how visible is his death now, and how visible is it for organizations, for individuals. How much do we really, are we really thinking about what needs to change? And how much are those outside of our community especially thinking about what we really need to change? And so for me, it's quite a reflective day, and at times quite sad, to think about how much more needs to be done.
Okay, thank you. Same question to Sace. How are you feeling? What are you reflecting on 1 year on?
I think I've been in a constant state of reflection, to be honest. I'm one of the people that really avoided it, and seeing the murder of George Floyd. I avoided it on social media because unfortunately, historically, Black death sells, and it was something that I didn't want to see and didn't want to put myself through. It was already a difficult time, obviously going through lockdown last year, and I think what made that moment such a watershed moment is that we all stood still for many months, and we all saw and heard and had some sort of connection to what had happened. And today's been pretty difficult, waking up in the morning and just thinking that we're still having the same issues today. We're still losing people to violence by the establishment and police officers, and it takes a lot to get justice. So it's a continual fight, to overcome this plight. And it's something that I'm still hopeful that we can overcome. Once we unify the people, which is the most important thing. But what we've got to understand is that the oppression that we're facing globally, it all comes down to pretty much the same people. So we need to come together and think about how we're going to overcome and how we're going to strategize. So, oppression anywhere is the same as in any different country. We have to overcome those individual obstacles and collective obstacles. So just still very reflective, but still optimistic. And we know there's a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Sace. And I'm going to come back to the bit around the unity and what needs to be done. But let's just staying with that pace and that feeling of reflection. I want to go over to Una for the same question. How are you feeling, Una, and a year on since George Floyd's murder?
Okay, it's a bit of a bittersweet moment, really, and day, considering it's been a year. I mean, I was just saying, I can't believe a whole year's gone by already, and like echoing what others have already said, there is still so much to do, because there is still so much that's wrong. There's still so much that doesn't work. There's a lot of systems, institutionally and systemically, that are not fit for purpose. And in order to try and get them changed, we have to convince those in power, or the people at the top, that look, it has to change, because you've been doing it for however long, and look, we're still no further on. So come on, let us help. My opinion is that you can't reflect what the Black community need if you don't speak to them, if you don't converse with them. If you have no idea what they're saying, then how can you sit in your office and say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and it's going to work? And George Floyd, I think his death wasn't in vain. It was an horrific, senseless death, murder, but it wasn't in vain, and his little girl, she'll say, my daddy changed the world. And yeah, he's making changes, he's in history anyway. So yeah, it is a bit of a bittersweet day for me.
Yeah, so feeling bittersweet, thinking about where to find the strength and the power to make that death, that event so meaningful that it doesn't ever happen to anybody else again, is I think what a lot of people are feeling. Thank you for sharing this. Shall we go to honesty, please? Same question, honesty. How are you feeling a year on after George Floyd's murder?
I suppose for me, it feels, I almost echo the sentiments of all three of you that have already spoken. I guess earlier on, we had our own internal discussion, and I just felt so heavy. There was this real sense of how complex is it to grieve for someone you didn't know, who you had no relationship to, but then, you know, the loss of this individual's life created and almost pulled back together a sense of community that I think hadn't been active for such a long time, in the same way. And so I guess a year later, part of me is grateful that there was that space afterwards, that we did draw together, because sometimes it does happen, and historically has happened. You become so desensitized to the murders that go on, like you said, to Black death and trauma, and it just being painted everywhere and sold, that you forget that actually this is a time to be with your people and with your community, and demand better, demand your own value, and the right to life, which in itself is so strange. But a year on, I guess I'm missing that again. I think it calms back with everything. There is a storm and then there is a calm. And so it almost feels like somehow, just by nature and by how the world keeps going, like when anyone passes, there is a sense of, oh, I guess we've all gone home again. And so part of me thinks actually it's really nice today, not just to be sat here with you guys, but I've seen all over socials that remembrance and people communicating again about the fact that we are still very much together. Our work is very much still not done. And there's plenty of work, both policy-wise and on individual person-to-person basis, change to be made. So, yeah.
Thank you, Honesty. Thank you for that honest reflection and pun on your name that we continuously have in the office, but thank you. That just carrying the sentiment across all of us at this moment. And before we get into some of the more trickier questions that we need to get to as well, I want to hear from Wilf. How are you feeling a year on?
I suppose, I'm feeling probably as angry and frustrated as when a year ago. I'll put it in this context that, it was a momentous moment. It was a moment that has been said is bittersweet. And I also think about the moment, thinking back a year in terms of what was happening in relation to the pandemic at that time. And one of the big debates around disproportionate Black deaths, and really that not really being heard. And then this moment came along in terms of George Floyd's death, which why it's bittersweet is that for me is that it actually made people start talking about race again. I have to go back to sort of the Stephen Lawrence murder to think about a moment when people had to start acknowledging and talking about race again as a problem. So for me, the anger, because why does it have to be, a horrific death of a Black person to even get people talking about it? Frustration, I suppose, because one way or another, either directly or indirectly, I've been campaigning against race discrimination for 40 years. And, there have been changes at that time, some good, some bad. But, somehow or other, I still think that people don't get it. They think it's about us. Right, and it's not about us. That's the point. It's not about us. It's about wider society, and it's about people needing to reflect, not just how their institutions, but how they, as people, behave, in the space around race, and acknowledging that race exists and what they do is very important in the quality of our lives. So yeah, frustrated in that sense.
Thank you, Will. So you've sort of taken me into a couple of other questions that we're thinking about at the moment, which is around what changes we've seen. Now, I'm just going to press on that for a moment, because quite a few people, if you look at social media and, well, traditional media as well, let's say that a lot of people are saying even that question, what has changed, is annoying some people. So I'm going to ask this question in a way that doesn't annoy anybody, which is that what changes have we seen, if any, bearing in mind that changes to institutions don't happen overnight. So we acknowledge that real systemic change isn't going to happen overnight or in 12 months. But even with that in mind, I just want to ask the question, what's changed? Has enough happened? Are we on the beginning of a journey to see real change, or is it all feeling as though we're still at that level of performativity, slogans, or are we somewhere else? Who would like to answer that question? Go for it, Will.
Shall I go first? Because, I do understand why some people get annoyed by that question, because, I'll quote somebody. I'll quote a Carter who said in one of these songs, time is a cycle, not a line. And often, we have this almost like Darwinian progress view of things. As time goes along, things will improve. But for me, one of the things about issues around race is that we have to acknowledge that actually we don't all live in a society where everybody is on an agenda where they want to get rid of racism and we all want to be equal. That there is an opposition, and so it really is important to acknowledge that it's a struggle. So in some of the things that have changed, they're very negative. Some of the things that the government have been up to in terms of using divide and rule tactics, the whole stuff around the Sewell report, in some ways typifies what we have to struggle against. On the other hand, one of the things that's changed that really gives me hope is the way that young people have got far more involved in the struggle. I haven't seen sort of young people, not just from Black communities, but white communities, come together since the early 80s, the late 70s and early 80s. And they bring a new energy to the struggle that was definitely needed. And so for me, that's a really positive thing, because what it indicates is that people now are rediscovering their own agency, their own belief that through what they can do, both as individuals and together, that they can change things.
When you say young people, Wilf, are you thinking, because before you said it's not just about us, it's about all of us. So the young people that you talk about, is that Black and young and Asian people, or is that just some groups of young people? Who's getting the agency to do something about racism?
Well, I mean, I think those people that were touched by that moment, do you know what I mean? And it's all, so often we talk about these things, in terms of in a detached way, especially when you're talking the sort of the political and the policy world. It's all about collecting evidence and trying to demonstrate that somehow this thing that's called racism that our world is built upon, right, is there, and therefore institutions need to take action to deal with it. But actually what drives people is emotion, is about recognizing injustice. So for me, when I talk about young people, I'm not talking about all young people. I'm talking about those young people that were touched by the injustice of that moment, that decided that they had to get up and do something. And that wasn't just people from our communities. That was people, that was young people from white communities as well. And that's very important. You know, I grew up on under the old slogan and anti-racist work of black and white unite and fight. And that's really important because it's going to take that to make real change. It can't just be what we do in our communities. It needs young people from the wider white community to recognise the injustice, because the injustice isn't only to us. You know, it's an injustice for them as well. You know, it's about the injustice of their lives. And one of the things that I often say is racism doesn't serve the function of oppressing us, but it serves the function of getting the wider community, the wider white community, to accept their own oppression.
And I think it's getting that understanding that racism about the we. It's all about all of us, and we all have a part to play. You just reminded me of something that I heard a few months ago when I heard young people's sentiments about hitting the streets, and young people being described as snowflakes, and somebody else said on the other side, oh, but snowflakes make avalanches, don't forget. That's what I'm thinking when you're talking about the power of young people and avalanches and movements. So I'm going to go over to maybe a younger person. Honesty, in your mind, you know, has there been enough change? And I'm really not trying to be superficial here and say that change can just happen overnight, but has something changed, and has enough happened, and what more needs to happen?
I think it's tricky. So to me, being of the younger generation, and I think there's an awareness. I think we're waking up much earlier, for lack of a better word. I always make Matrix references, but it is that feeling of we are waking up a lot earlier because we have to. And that's probably why it hasn't happened in such a long time, because actually the system and society has been painted for like a between section, that everything was okay again, that we have supermodels and artists and the government isn't that bad, and the notion that here in the UK it's subtle racism and all the kind of myths that have happened when we talk about race inequality. I suppose when I'm thinking about change, I don't think there will ever be enough. I think no matter where we get to in society, there will always be someone who demands better. And I think that's the right thing. I still doubt, I think heavily, how much of the institutions are willing to change. You know, Wilfie referenced the Sewell report, and obviously some people may know, some people may not, but we as Runnymede took a very direct approach to saying, how on earth do you release this report that this is false and doesn't speak to the lived experiences or the facts that we have? I think more than anything, like you said, lived experiences are you know, what's real, that can't be discounted. But even so, if you want to go to facts, then we can, and they're there. And so in that way, it's almost like incidentally radicalizing an entire generation when you definitely don't want to. It's almost like you've woken a bit of a sleeping giant there. You will have much preferred a Gen Z who was politically apathetic and tuned out and not interested and desensitized. But what happened is we watched a man who, I think at first, it's just a man, you know, before we do dad, brother, uncle. I think it's young people watched a person die, you know, and we were on the internet. We are not switched off, you know. Some people missed it or heard about it on the news. We are first line, and so we saw it and we've reacted. I think there's a lot of lip service happening. I think a year later there are still things that aren't being changed, and I think that for as long as we know institutions and individuals and attitudes, actually, if it's taken someone 40 years to become a director or a senior member of staff in X institute, how long will it take to change the attitudes that society has instilled in them repeatedly everywhere they went? And then how do we ask them to not just undo that in themselves and unlearn all of these problematic ideals, but then to teach others? That's a long process. So I think it is a frustrating question, not the one you've asked, Halima, but that question of just, has there been enough change? It's, to me, it's impossible in 12 months. However, I think we've got a lot to look forward to and should be looking forward to the coming years, because I just think the demand for better is just going to keep growing. I don't think people are willing to be quiet anymore. Yeah.
That is so heartening to hear. And I suppose, like, wanting to see more happening. I'm looking at Pauline now, because I know in the business space, so we used to say at Runnymede before that we were always so isolated, a niche sector, and just only the really progressive people could handle talking about racism. And suddenly that feels very different. And as you know, at Lloyd's and in other companies, people are actively talking about what anti-racism means and what's being done. And I was just so reassured by that. Obviously, there's a lot more we could be doing, but I want to hear from you on what has happened and changed in the last 12 months, Pauline, from a business perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a really interesting one, from especially in the sector of financial services that I sit. So when I think about the insurance sector, it's not very diverse. Fairly frank and honest. If we were pre-COVID times, you'd walk around and you would question where any of the individuals from an ethnic minority backgrounds are, because many of them were working in some of the back office functions, a lot of the operational areas. So we weren't seeing much diversity in certainly our front office and client facing roles from a market perspective. And Lloyd's is made up of hundreds of insurance firms and brokers and managing agents that do business. What I think I've seen most definitely is the dialogue coming to the table. That doesn't mean we are by any way stretch of the way there, but I think that I have definitely seen, because I myself have conducted the conversations with CEOs, with chairs, to talk about what are they doing around ethnicity, what is happening in their firms. What I think we saw a lot of organisations do at the very beginning was really big virtue signalling statements, whether that's, we've put a statement up on our website, we've done some pieces, whether it's a black square on, Instagram, social media not being my biggest, strongest point all the time, but it's very much there were lots of virtue signals and very little actions. People rushed to publish their ethnicity pay gap report without an action plan. So what are you going to do? You've got a gap, what are you going to do about it? People went out and they've trained their staff at the very beginning. So that was last year. It's a year ago. People forget, people join your organisation and people leave. So is that part and embedded in what you do? Have you now started to think about what the barriers might be, and have you asked your colleagues? We have done that in the corporation of Lloyd's, and I think I've seen the more progressive organisations really try to understand the lived experience of their Black colleagues, especially, but also of other ethnic minority colleagues, and that told us much more than any of the sort of quick statements and the training could give us. That it told us that people were still experiencing subtle, not just subtle forms of racism and microaggressions. It's, people are still experiencing, and actually what I see now, a year on, is whether people think, right, we've done that, tick the box, we're done. And actually what we've got to make sure, and this is the broader business, not, business overall, is making sure that we keep spinning that plate, that we keep the drumbeat going. And actually it is intentional that every person, it's brilliant that young people, different communities all came together in this moment. They also have to continue to hold organisations to account, so that the actions that they've committed to, so that the steps that they've made, so that they're asking the questions and saying, what more have you done? And if you don't ask that question, organisations have to respond to their regulators, they have to respond to their board, they have to respond to their employees, or people walk. And I often say, I was a chair of governors for many years, that the point of governors and being a governor in a school is having an opinion and bringing that to the school where my children previously went, so that I can say, hang on a second, we live in X borough, very well populated. We have a very well-known author who recently had a book that was made into a series on BBC. Why is she not on the wall during Reading Month? Why is she not up there? And if I, as the Black person, am not asking that question, who's going to ask?
Who was that, Pauline? Which author?
Harry Blackman.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So if you think about it, if I don't challenge, the head teacher to say, why is she not there? Like, oh, I've never heard of her. What do you mean? We're in the borough where she lives. How do you not? So how do we make sure, how do I challenge that? You don't challenge unless you are there and asking the questions. So as employees, as business owners, as individuals, as consumers, we have a voice and we have to use it. Why are we not asking in the schools where your children go to school, what are you doing? And it's exactly the same in business. So I've seen change. I've seen the conversation being started, but how we make that conversation meaningful, how we make conversation move to action is by ensuring that we continue to use our voice. I'm lucky I'm in a position where I can use my position to be able to influence both our organisation, our leaders, and bring that dialogue. And we are actively having that dialogue. The commitment for us at the leadership level has been outstanding, but that's not the case for everyone. And it requires people to bring their voice to make sure that the actions are continued to bear through. So I think it's about us owning, and that's us in the broader community, having a voice and using that voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love what I'm hearing, Pauline. Like, I started this conversation on anti-racism a year ago thinking we've got to hold that space on anti-racism, and someone reminded me, no, hold it, you own it. You are owning that conversation on anti-racism at Lloyd's, in your community space, in your home, as a friend, colleague. That's what we do. So it's not just about holding, because that's too temporary. We actually have to own that conversation and space and keep pushing.
Temporary measures are not enough to change what has taken years to embed in society. So,
and if the voice of business gets this, I think the voice of charity sector, how would you reflect back on that question?
I think from the only thing I'd add there is the voice perspective. I think that what's really important is that when I look internally, many of the dialogue for us is actually, we're not interested in the Sewell report. We've got our own data. We know where our gaps are. We know that there are things that we want to really focus on and drive, that we have the ability to change. That's what we can do. And then how does that work with our charity partners and our community partners? And what can we do that's really tangible, embedded in organisations for the long term?
Yeah, no, I hear you, Pauline, and just that strong leadership coming from the corporate sector is so important. I'm going to go over to Sais with the same question, and then to Una, and then if you didn't want to answer this question, Sais, there's something around policing. Has enough changed there? So you take your pick. Has enough changed, or has enough changed on the policing front? Which do you prefer to answer?
I'll be greedy if I'm going to do both. But I think what we've got to do is that I think we've got to redefine our own realities. And what I mean by that is the term racism is still upholding a system which continues to oppress us. And the thing that Wolf rightly said is that racism affects more than just us. It affects society, because what it does, it kind of compartmentalizes oppression to one group, even though we're all being oppressed. So if we now continue to use the term racism, because there's only one race, it's the human race. It's upholding that system, that kind of two-tier system. And I think if we start to change the language and change our own narratives and how we see that, and then people will look at what's happening in the world as oppression. So when you look at it as oppression, everybody then can actually relate. People can't relate to racism because they can't, magically become black, tomorrow. They can't do that. They can't experience that. But when you make it personal, that's when you have collective action, and that creates a spark within people. And I think what Honesty said about young people, being at the advent and the forefront of this, they say that revolutions often they skip a generation. I think we're at the forefront of a revolution, because we are seeing what is going on in the world, and a lot of people now, because of social media and the access to information and freely sharing information, people are seeing what's going on in the world. And if you don't make that personal connection and connect the dots in terms of what is happening to us all, then we can't come together as a collective, because if it's not personal to you, then you're not going to take up the mantle and be like, right, I'm going to do something about this. And then that's where we're at, I think, right now. And I think we really need to just redefine our own realities and figure out what it is to us and how we are being, treated, and how we're at the bottom rungs of the ladder. And there's only a select group that are benefiting from this. And that's what racism does. It benefits an elite group. Well, we'll call them elite, a certain group of people, because if you're acting in that way, that means that you don't want to really be part of society. You want to create your own society, and we're just kind of collateral in that society. But in terms of the policing, what I've been doing over the last years, working with New Scotland Yard and the Mayor of London and Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor, in terms of the training around the police. I've been stopped and searched over 30 times since the age of 14. I've been assaulted by police on 3 occasions. The most notable time was age 14, just coming home from school in my school uniform. And the problem that we have is that when you're too emotional, when it comes to those situations and your interaction with the police, and when you're young like me, you have a lack of emotional intelligence and emotional understanding and regulation because of that historical context of policing and how you've seen people being treated. So the minute you're approached by police, your back's up straight away. And when something happens to you, it reinforces that. And then you carry that. And that's what happened to me for 24 years. Every time I got stopped by police, there might be 1 in 10 stops that I might be a positive, engagement, but 9 out of 10 were negative. And that reinforced how I felt, and I was taken to court by the police, and I tried to take them to court for assaulting me, and it was thrown out by the CPS. And as a 14-year-old in your school uniform in Camberwell Court, thinking that you're going to go to prison for something that you never did, and you've been treated in a certain way, and an adult in society is supposed to know better, what does that tell a 14-year-old? That this world is messed up. There's no justice. I didn't get my justice. But 24 years down the line, getting stopped and searched last year and filming it, I literally had a light bulb moment and said, right, if I don't change, this situation is not going to change. I've got to find solutions rather than doing the very British thing of complaining and not doing anything. I've been doing that for many years. So I'm working with young people, and I've got to showcase to them that there are ways that we can get around this. We have to think about it. We have to emotionally regulate. We have to be emotionally intelligent. We have to be articulate enough and understand our rights and actually stand up for ourselves, because if we don't do it, no one's going to do it for us. So it's all about really finding solutions and sharing those solutions and trying to inspire others. And again, this goes back to redefining our own realities and changing the narrative that's been bestowed upon us year after year, day after day, hour after hour, this whole narrative around racism. If we now change that term and say, right, this is oppression to all people, these are crimes against humanity, then we can actually make a collective, action and make those changes going forward.
Really powerful, Stacey, because what I think you're picking up on that thread that Wilf introduced, which is that race isn't just to do with Black people or Asian people, it's actually to do with all of us. And once we get that, we can kind of move forward in that way that we need to leapfrog and accelerate. Like, we can't be just like doing a bit of change and temporarily unless you make that mind shift change, it's not going to happen fast enough. And there's nothing worse than increasing or raising young people's or anyone's expectations, and then you've got this whole movement that's asking for more, and you know what, you just destroy people's aspirations and hopes and futures by not giving them or meeting them halfway. And that's the way you actually suppress people's dreams, isn't it? You don't give them or meet them halfway, and they come away feeling as though change isn't possible. So that's why I think for us, it's so important to give young people that hope that you are actually going to change this. Don't wait. Well, by the way, Stacey, I think it's very British to also challenge, change that narrative, right? So just complain. No, Brits are, if they want to, they can innovate. They can.
Yeah.
So this is where we are. So just when you talked about being 14, my heart goes out to you every time I hear this, because I think no 14-year-old will have known at that time the reason why he or she is stopped and searched at 14 in a school uniform is institutional racism, racialized police stop and search. You wouldn't have known that, but you definitely knew it was unjust and not right. But it was down to the adults and the responsible people in that system to ensure that that didn't happen to you. The system let you down. And that's what we're trying to change, right? And anyway, I don't know at what point you got that clarity, but we know that we never, ever want to see another 14-year-old go through that again. So thank you for sharing that. And I need to get to Yuda on this question. I'm so sorry it took a while. How are you reflecting on how much change has been possible? And are you as irritated at this question as my friends on social media are?
Yeah, I am. And the reason that I'm irritated is because I think there's been major problems in this country with the police force. And when it used to be the sus laws, which, you know, they could basically do what they wanted, whenever they wanted, how they wanted, and got away with it, you know, I think it's quite hard to break that cycle. And one of the ways that Pursuit of Happiness of trying, you know, to get at the table and make changes and, you know, and to bring our voices to them is through scrutiny panels. And we've joined the West Yorkshire Scrutiny Panel, we've joined the IAG panels, we've joined the crime prosecution as well, because we feel that unless we're there, they're going to speak for us when they don't know us. So we've the West Yorkshire Police Panel actually has been one that I've been quietly impressed with in comparison to anything else that we've been doing over the last 6 months since we launched. And it's because they've actually come to the table and they've said to us, right, okay, we know that there's problems here, there and there. What is it that you lot are wanting? What is it that you guys see that where we can make changes? And it seems to us that, right, okay, they're really wanting to try. Whether it works or not, that's a different matter, but they're wanting to try. And we've actually been quite honest within the meetings as well. You know, we've been able to say how we feel and what we feel. You know, like I've told them that, you know, the current system it's not fit, you know, needs fixing because there's so many disparities. You know, our Black people are getting arrested and locked up a lot more than any other race. A lot of them are getting sectioned with mental health problems than any other race. And then while they're in the custody, they're not getting their health addressed as they should. Like, you know, Black people suffer with sickle cell a lot more. And, you know, there's problems within the system, the prison system there, you know, but people not getting the help and the care they need because they see people as Black people as strong, they're superhuman, you know, they're not in pain, you know, and it's wrong, you know, as you see with the healthcare system, with our Black women having babies, disparities there, and it needs fixing so much. And we want to believe that there will be a change and that things will change with our help, with our voices at the table. And we know it's going to take time. But if we don't try, if we don't do what our ancestors did way back, then we'll never know, will we? And to sit there and think, oh, right, okay, well, someone else must be doing it, or we'll let somebody else do it. It don't work like that. If we want something done, we're going to have to do it ourselves. We have to put ourselves out there. And I think the main thing that we can do is educate people. And like others have echoed, it's not about just us. We need to educate everybody. You know, education is the key because that's where you're going to get your power. So that's the way I think.
Brilliant. I just wanted to say, you know, if anybody's listening in the audience, I haven't seen any questions come in from the audience, so perhaps I didn't do a good job of inviting any questions. So, you know, we've got another 10-15 minutes in, so shoot those questions through and we'll make sure that we take some of your questions, if that's okay. And I suppose we've got about 15 minutes. I'm going to come back to this question of hope. And the kind of hope I feel, you know, I've been around the block a few times, right? But I really, really feel hope when I meet other people who are just making those changes, right? So I just want to ask each and every one of you, while some other questions come in from the audience, is there anything you've seen in the last year where you have felt an initiative or something that has made you think, God, do you know what, thank God that is happening, or that will make that real systems change that we've been talking about, but I haven't been able to articulate it. So is there anything that you've seen happen and you think we could do more of that? That's fantastic. To kind of, you know, deal with structural racism or deal with issues of racism that aren't structural, maybe. Remember, it's not just the big changes. It could be making a change in your school or in the grocery store. We need to feel as though it's constant, that we're making the changes as we go along. Sometimes we'll make the fast change, the deep change, but even those everyday acts of resistances matter as well. So who wants to go for this one first? Who'd like to answer that question? Says, go for it.
Yeah, I think just touching on the work that we've been doing with young people in the schools and with organizations, and as you know, the work that we've been doing with Goldman Sachs, it's just been about the education and sharing those experiences, which has been key, which we haven't been able to do before. You know, we regularly spoke about the things that we experienced. It was like, oh, that was in the 70s, mate. That was in the 80s. That doesn't happen anymore. And it was always dismissed. And that was always difficult. And I'll be honest, with the police training, I've had some really, really deep conversations with some police officers who really want to understand what it is like, you know, and what that Black British experience is like. And I think when it comes down to education, as Una said, it's about meeting people where they're at. And I think what we've done too often is that we force people to try to understand what's going on. You've got to voluntarily engage in something that you're interested in. And I think once we see that, then it's about then picking it up and saying, look, this is how it is, and not in a condescending manner, but this is my experience. How do you see the world? And it's about two-way education. It's about us learning and understanding as well. And that then creates empathy. And when you understand it, also respect. And I think it's very, very important that I've had a lot of very powerful conversations with people that I otherwise wouldn't speak to over the last year. And that's been really, really good for me personally, because I feel that that can be the key to it and bringing people together. And as I said, I'm just, you know, unity of the people is the key thing. I didn't used to think like that when I was younger, because I thought it was always a us and them mentality. But as the more I educate myself, the more I read, you know, listen to Angela Davis last week, you know, the freedom is a constant struggle. I learned so much, you know, especially with the Black feminist movement and how that has been at the advent of so many civil rights movements. And it's again thinking that the charismatic Black male leader is the person that we should always look to. It's not, it's the Black women. And we're always forgetting them when it comes to history. So again, it's about sharing what you're learning and experiencing, and actually creating a culture of lifelong learning and getting people to actually be comfortable and speak and expressing themselves, because we don't speak to each other as much as we want to anymore, because we're always in our phones. Our kids don't speak, they don't know how to articulate themselves. So again, we have let ourselves down, we've let society down to some degree, because there's a lot more that we can do. So I feel that the education, you know, aspect is very, very key, and actually just talking and sharing those experiences and building empathy.
So there's so much humility and strength and leadership there. I'm sure like every woman was then thinking, yeah, just needed to hear that, you know, just a bit of support and love and care from a strong male brother. And I felt it. I know everybody else felt it. So thank you for that. I've now actually got loads of questions coming in. So clearly I wasn't reading in the right direction. I'm just going to ask specific questions for specific people now, if that's okay. So I'm going to go for quite a few in a series. From Pauline Rutter, to honesty, what is the self-care that you suggest for those doing the work that we do, but we get the knockbacks and the pushbacks? So just hold that question for a moment. And for another one, I think for anybody on the panel, Tracy Joliffe is saying, what three things need to happen collectively, or what three things we need to push for collectively over the next year to create the conditions for driving forward and accelerating the pace of racial justice? So I'm going to let Honesty answer that one, because that was for you, and then the rest of the panel can answer the question around the three things we want to see changed and happen.
Definitely, I will do my best, considering self-care is a fairly subjective and individual thing. I think the first thing that comes to mind from that question is the Audre Lorde quote, that caring for yourself is an act of political warfare. It's essential. You've referenced doing the work. I think it's important to recognise that looking after your well-being, your health, your family and community, and rest. So many activists or people that are engaged in anti-oppression work, thinking of you, Sace, the need for rest is there, and it can be so tempting to just go so hard constantly because you are fighting. But I would say sometimes you have to take a break and take a step back and remind yourself that the time for change is always now, but it does not sit on your shoulders alone. And so you can break and someone else can carry that weight. There will never be a gap. If you was asking individually, what do? I love to binge watch true crime things. I have a puppy. I don't take her on walks as often as I should, but I'll claim that anyway. And speaking, internally, I think within Runnymede and also elsewhere with friends and family, I'm massive on holding space for how you feel, whatever that feeling is. So if that looks like anger, if it looks like waking up today and wanting to cry in the Zoom meeting, because actually it's been a year since George Floyd died and I'm upset about it and I'm grieving this man, then you do that and you hold space and you embrace the fact that you are human, and it's your humanity that allows you to do the work. It's your humanity that will allow you to impact the world and create long-lasting change. It's only because you're able to feel and that you're aware that you need help yourself that you're able to help others. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, Honesty. And back to that question around what 3 things do we collectively need to push for to accelerate pace and change on racial equity and justice? I'm going to pick on someone, I think. Will, and be brief, because I want to get to a last question as well, and looking at the time.
That's a difficult question. 3 things. I can't think of. Well, I can think of many things. But the one thing I'll only talk about one thing really, because and it arises from something Say said really about narrative and how we frame this. Because ultimately, this is about our values and about democracy. What do we mean about democracy? But democracy is meaningless if we don't have accountability. So one of the things that I really think that if we're going to have change, that we have to demand from our institutions and from each other is accountability. Because without that, we can't build unity. We can't, we can't almost like push our horizons in terms of expectation. Because one of the things I always think, and I know to be brief, and I will be brief, is that sometimes we lack so little ambition. I grew up when racism was still very political. And I think it is about politics, and people wanted to change the world. Didn't just want to get rid of racism. Wanted to change the world, and we have to find that ambition again.
Thank you, Wilf. And I'm going to try and get Pauline and Una answer that question as well. The 3 changes could relate to work, could relate to other aspects of your lives. So, do you want to take that one first, and then we'll come to Pauline?
Okay, yeah. Just touching on what Wilf said really about the politics. When you think about our children in school, and as they're growing up and they're learning, well, we need them to look at the bigger picture later in life. They should have aspirations of being a politician or getting into politics, because that's where the changes can be made. So if our youth are in school and they see that there's nothing wrong with going down that career path or, wanting to learn more, because if they get to be an MP or the Prime Minister, then that's big things in terms of running the country and what changes you could actually make. I think it's important for our youth to see that politics are not. It shouldn't be done, or it's for your stereotype, white oldish person. It shouldn't be like that. I think it needs to be made more hip to be in politics. You know, I think it should be just the norm, and I think that's where it all starts. It starts in schools, and it's, yeah, that's what I want to see. I want to see more of our youth within and without of our community going down that road, because that's where changes really can happen and they can make things happen. So yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
Yep. So very similar to kind of what Sace was saying around, like really, really, really letting young people feel that they can carry the future when they are young, and not when they've been traumatized years later, when we have to work on them to make them feel that they belong. So starting a lot earlier would go a long way. For Pauline, what three is probably ambitious. What changes you would make that would make that fast, accelerated change for racial equality?
So I'm going to address this in a slightly different way, because it covers a couple of things that you've asked about, but it's one answer. So firstly, you know, I am moved by the energy of our young people. Yeah. However, there is also some of the older folk out there as well.
Are there, Pauline?
I'll just say older.
Ourselves, yes.
The older folk. And I think that, you know, myself and a group of colleagues, not all from Lloyd's, but within the insurance sector, have come together recognising that we as senior professionals of colour have the ability to use our voice, to amplify our voice with those individuals who are responsible and can make change. And the reason why I said it ties to the three things, because we actually agreed on three simple things. Number one, that we needed education. So we need to help drive that education. So that has come up. Number two is that we need data, and that it is really important to help that story in organisations. They need to be moving on the data, because that is what leads to that conversation. And number three, and most importantly, which leans to Wilf's point around accountability, but it's about them holding each other to account. And when I say them, we are talking about the chairs and the CEOs in our industry. We've made it specific to us. We're able to then drive that change and dialogue. And we are saying, we will hold you to account, but you're going to hold yourself to account as well. And our first two inaugural meetings were really quite something. We've sort of stepped back and said, did we really do this? We didn't rush. It's taken us over a year. We started the dialogues much earlier, but it really got amplified when after George Floyd was killed, we then said, hang on a second, when we look around, what changes do we want to see in our sector? And what responsibility do we have to be able to help that happen? And the reality is that when you are in organisations, sometimes as a senior professional, you are the only person, the only Black woman, the only Black man. And to find a collective voice in one organisation can be hard. Why not work with people around you in your partner firms and collectively amplify your voice to drive change? So it's three things. It's an initiative that is really close to my heart with 7 other colleagues in the sector. We're not live yet, but it is called Race Action Through Leadership.
Brilliant. And if anybody wants information, they can reach out to us. We can share maybe more about that initiative. Thank you. So I've been told we can go for another 10 or 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a specific question to Sace, and then just come back and let you finish with anything you want to share that's not scripted. I haven't formed a question for you, but it's burning, it's there, and you've got hundreds of people listening. So if you want to say something to connect to that audience, I'd love to give you that time. But one question, Sace, it's an important one, addressed to you, but you can appreciate it's a bigger question than just your experience. Somebody's asking, how can we help our young, Jennifer is asking, how can we help our young youth overcome the decades of trauma of being disrespected, made to feel less than perfect just because of their skin color and is a different hue? How do we work with young people to just get that self-esteem back that the system has made them feel as though their skin color is not equal? What can we do?
The first thing we can do is give young people our time. We don't give young people our time. And I've said this many times, that when you give time to young people that are not your your family or not related to you, that time equals love, because they realize that there's no obligation for you to be there and to support them. And then they can realize that actually there are people outside of my family that actually care about me. So that is the first step. We need to give young people more time. We need to make sure, and this goes down, back to the economic kind of foundations that we have or don't have. You know, we don't have a strategy how we can have our own economy so that we can actually have our own schools and supplementary schools and things that we need to have in a community that we can provide for our young people. We're always looking to people that have oppressed us to solve the problems. They don't want to do that. They don't want to give us any money. So therefore, if we then withdraw from the system and take our money and vote with our feet and put our money into our communities, for example, I've had this idea burning in my mind for this year about having the Black Friday where nobody goes to work, nobody goes to school, nobody spends a penny. And that's what the government are going to realize. Well, okay, they're serious now. We're going to start giving the things that they need. And again, it's down to education with young people. How are we educating our young people? We're continuously lying to our young people. We're not telling them the truth. We feel that they're not ready to handle the truth. And this now impacts how resilient they are today, which young people are not as resilient as they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because we're not actually having conversations with them and saying, right, you have a part to play in the solution. We're not getting them to make critical decisions, informed decisions, having guided discovery from people that they trust within the community to actually formulate their own realities and how they can actually navigate this world. And we're not giving them a really a foundation of culture. We're not talking about what they are and what they've come from. It's always the negativity. And the problem that we need to do is show more positivity. And we need to educate more informally and give them a platform to actually be more inquisitive, because that's why they're out here and they're actually acting out, because they know that they want attention and there's no support. This is why they're going out and do these things. These are cries for help. And until we actually realize this and give them that what they need in consultation with young people, not us dictating from an adult perspective, because if we always come with our preformed agendas, it's about listening to young people and allowing them to lead. We allow them to lead from a young age, you know, from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and make those decisions. Then when they're 16, 17, they can make more informed decisions, which are going to actually impact society and actually create a future for them, which is going to be reflective of what they want.
To learn to trust young people, because they suffer from a trust deficit to begin with, but just let go earlier to give young people the chance to make their own decisions, is what I'm hearing. Okay, thank you. Well, look, we're getting to that stage where I think we've got lots of people listening in. And as you were saying, that it's not today that we're reflecting. We all find time and space in the way that we can, and we will continue to reflect on what racism means in our lives and in the systems and the institutions that we work in, not because we want to be debilitated by it, but because we think that the best we can be and the most confident institutions can actually handle those conversations, and we grow together, the we grows together. So it's just a really message out there to people who say, well, if you constantly talk about the challenges, you just can't thrive. If you don't talk about them at all, you're basically leaving people with a feeling that there's something wrong with them, and not giving them any agency to get to a better place. So I'm just gonna, I'm getting some comments as well. That's kind of just really great comments from the audience, everyone, around feeling the sense of positivity and hope, and just going with that will constantly give you the voice that you need as a young person to make that change. So I just got that comment from the YouTube wall. So, okay, here's what I wanted to do now. Can I just go around, maybe with honesty back that way? Just, you know, any final thoughts on what you'd like to be thinking about, what you'll be doing, how you've been influenced in the last few months, and, you know, what's on your mind going forward?
Big question. I guess my instinctive answer was I will continue to seek joy in this. I think this is hard stuff, and this is, you know, the fight against racism and oppression more generally across so many identities. And for me, I think I always feel highlighted in my identity and more conscious of it being that I'm not just a Black woman, I'm also queer and I'm also disabled. And so in that, it's always like, there's never not going to be a fight, but I sure as hell want to fight and have joy in that. You know, I want to be in the trenches and still feel camaraderie and support and moments of bliss. So yeah, I think that's what I'll be working towards, to not forget the trees in the forest, I suppose.
Thank you. Yuna.
Okay, I want to work towards doing what we're doing, being able to make the changes so that we can prosper. I would like to see our community being able to work for themselves more, put more into the community to benefit the whole community. I would like a Black Wall Street in the UK. That's something I would like to see. I know that's a big dream, but you know, it might come one day, not in my lifetime, but it might come one day. And I would like to see our generations behind us continuing the work that we're doing today, because without that continuum, we're not going to achieve what we need to achieve.
Thank you. Will, over to you with the same question. So it's not a question. What's on your mind and what do you have to share as a final thought?
I suppose, and it relates back to the fact that we're all sitting here talking about George Floyd. I mean, one of the things that I grew up with, and you know, one of the things I've been trying to do in my work is to reconnect the dots to people facing the same struggle in other parts of the world. I think sometimes, so often, we get parochial about thinking about racism, just relation between us in our society and the people who run it, and forget it's an international struggle, and it's an international struggle which is also about the future of our planet, our very existence. You know, so you know, for me, it's important, you know, in my work that actually I try and get trade unionists connected up to those struggles that are going on in Africa, in Asia, in South America, get people to understand that actually, despite all our struggles, actually, we are still a lot more privileged than people that are facing those struggles. Our economic well-being is built off their suffering, and we have a responsibility, being in the belly of the beast, to actually support them as much as we have to fight for ourselves.
Here. Sace.
Yeah, I just want to really touch on what Honesty said about taking time for yourself. I feel this year, especially for me, I've really felt the burden of the world on my shoulders at times, especially having my son who's 14, you know, having a Black son in this world is very, very scary. You know, it's scary for me as a man. So just trying to support him on his journey, but also I want to help everybody. If I had all the money in the world, I'd help everybody. Okay, so it's all good. I just want to help everybody, and someone's trying to get hold of you.
Sorry.
Is that your MacBook?
It's the 14-year-old. Sorry.
Right on cue.
Oh my God. Go, sorry, Sace.
No problem. No problem. Yeah, I just feel that's something which is really, I'm an empath, you know, I feel people's pain and I want to help. And sometimes when you overstretch yourself, you're actually less effective. And I think with what's happened with Sasha Johnson, and that's really been weighing heavily on my mind because of the work that I'm doing personally, and think that's an attack on all of us, regardless of who did it and how it happened. It's an attack on all of us. And it's made me think that, wow, there's a lot out there in terms of negative forces that are trying to keep us down. However, I'm not scared. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep pushing. I will take my time out, which is important. I will take my time out in the summer with my son. And it gives me a chance to reconnect with humanity, reconnect with myself, and actually give me a further kind of added purpose to actually overcome. So I'm feeling very positive in a lot of negativity, in the state of confusion of the world. But I know that things are going to change because there's a lot of people feeling the same way, and we can't continue on this way.
Thank you, Sace. Thank you for that. And then Pauline.
Sure. So I guess for me, it's very much around really thinking about how I continue to use my voice for positive influence. And that's a journey I've been on for probably the last 7 or 8 years through my work with Girl Up. And I found my voice in Ethiopia on a refugee's floor in a camp in Jijiga. And what I learned at that point was how important it was for me to bring my voice for others. This wasn't about me, it was about them. And if I can't bring my voice for other people, then what on earth am I doing in the role that I'm in the community that I live? So how I ensure I bring my voice, but how we ensure collectively we don't leave it to the next generation to fix. We all have a role in society, we have a role to play, and it's really important we do that. And if we learn to do that, the next generation will learn how important it is to pay it forward, because that's what's really critical. You know, Stacey, you said some amazing things about not just talking to young people, not just, you know, engaging them in the dialogue. How many conversations are we having about the situations in the world broadly, as well as the ones that are impacting our community? Just at the weekend, my mother and I were talking to my daughter about investing in her future business ideas. How important is it that we pay it forward and do it for ourselves? So, holding that voice, really thinking about paying it forward, and really thinking about the community, because for me, the community helped raise my children, and I've got to pay that back. So it is about the community.
Here, pay it forward. And I sort of started jotting down what each of you was saying, so I could join the dots a bit. Well, so I've been listening to what you've been saying, and I heard Black Friday, but flipped, because actually, is there a Black Friday? But it means something else. But what we're saying is we want a Black Friday that puts agency and empowerment in our voice and our vote and our purchasing power, rather than getting us to all spend like crazy, and we're not thinking about actually what matters to us. So I really love the idea of Black Friday or Black Wall Street, again, flipping that to give us agency and power, where our lives and our voices really matter, Black lives really matter. So there's something really strong there coming from you all, as a Black community. I am obviously of South Asian descent. What I'm hearing is a very, very strong Black voice. And what Black Lives Matter really taught us is that, yes, other lives matter, we know that. However, there are certain groups that are particularly vulnerable at particular times in history, that has accumulated disadvantage to such a level that you have to focus on Black lives, because otherwise we'll be staying here for another 40 years and my child has to go through that. So I just wanted to say, as a South Asian person, why it's so important that it's that conversation and not the other one that people keep saying, well, surely everybody's. Anyway, just wanted to put it out there, and also draw attention to the fact that I cannot speak for that Black voice and that perspective. And you have just kind of shared everything that needed to be said. The audience is, sending me kind of just so many messages that I can't stay on top of, to thank you for your wisdom and your insights and just everything that you're sharing. It has meant so much for everybody to just be together right now. We didn't come with an agenda. We didn't come with an agenda to say, that part of society hasn't done enough, or this part needs to do more. It was really about trying to hold this space together collectively, maybe grief also for a man we didn't know, but whose lives represent so much for us as well. And to unite really in this time today, 1 year on. I did want to just finish again with that last thought, that George Floyd was a father and a son. And maybe we could just spend a few seconds just in silence, remembering him in power, and then we can close the event. If it's okay with you, could we just take a few seconds? Hey, oh, it feels so good to slow something down sometimes, right? Just to have silence, really. So thank you for giving us this silence and to remember George Floyd. And I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for the amazing audience that is being patient in virtual situations where you can't actually hear your own voice, but you have to use technology. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for my lovely colleagues for making this event possible. Stay connected, stay in touch, take care of each other, take care of you. There's always another fight the next day, but we have to rest. And I'll finish by saying something from our favorite poet, Maya Angelou, "Still we rise."